Welcome to this second session on the discipline of forgiveness. Why is forgiveness important? Well, in the first session, clearly, we know that God is a forgiving God and Jesus Christ told us to forgive. But I think more importantly, why? That's telling us what we should do, but I believe that there's a significant reason behind why God tells us, why Jesus Christ said that we absolutely must learn how to forgive others. I believe that when something occurs, when an offense happens, that if we don't properly deal with that, the resentment, the sense of frustration can grow. And as that frustration and that resentment grows, it ultimately will result in bitterness. If you turn to Hebrews chapter 12, and in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15, I think there's a significant key to why forgiveness is so important. It says in Hebrews 12:15, "See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." See, forgiveness breaks that root of bitterness. And specifically in Hebrews, it says that that bitter root will grow up and it will defile many. What is defilement? Defilement is a state of unholiness. If something was defiled, it was unclean and it was not suitable for sacrifice or to be used in temple offering. God says specifically that bitterness is a root that will grow up and defile us. And that is why I believe it is so important for us to learn to forgive. I believe also that there are some definite things that hinder us in forgiving, and most of it is related to misunderstandings of what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is what breaks us from that past event. When an offense occurs, we move on, and if I have resentment and it grows to bitterness, it's almost as if I'm chained or tied to that event. The fact of the matter is, the person who may have harmed me hasn't even thought twice about it. They've moved on. But yet if I hold that event in my mind and continue to dwell and allow that resentment to fester into bitterness, I'm still stuck at that event. Forgiveness really is more about me than about the event or the person. When I forgive, I am breaking or cutting that cord. I'm breaking the chains that have bound me to that event. I'm literally breaking that root, and it ceases. Unforgiveness is really all about me. If I am not forgiving to a person, it's about me. I want to hold on to that sense of empowerment. In fact, unforgiveness can be very empowering. It makes you feel strong. Well, I'm not going to forgive so-and-so because they did this. See, it's all about me, which I think really is rooted in pride. And you know what God says about pride. He resists the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. Forgiveness breaks that. Forgiveness requires humility. Forgiveness requires me breaking the bond to that event. And then I can move on. I think there's a couple keys here that we need to understand when it comes to forgiveness. Number one, forgiveness is not a feeling. A lot of people, I've heard them say, well, I don't feel like forgiving so-and-so. That's right, you don't feel like forgiving them. But forgiveness is not a feeling. It's a choice. God says forgive. He doesn't say feel like forgiving. He says it's a choice. If I command you to be happy, I command you right now, be happy. It doesn't work. Why? Because happiness is a feeling. And you can't command feelings. If I command you to be sad, no, be sad. No, be sad. What are you doing smiling? Be sad. See, you can't command feelings. God doesn't command us to feel. God commands us to forgive. Therefore, forgiveness is not a feeling. And feelings are emotions. I can be angry, I can be hurt, I can be sad, and in the midst of those emotions, I can still forgive. Why? Because God says He commands us to forgive, and you can't command feelings. Therefore, forgiveness is not a feeling, it's a choice. Another significant key to remember in forgiving, which I think hinders and hurts people to move into forgiveness, is they think it's a one-time event. Well, I forgave so-and-so. I forgave him. Well, yeah, but you seem to be resentful or bitter. See, what's going on here? Well, remember, there was a time where Peter approached Jesus. Yeah, I could see Peter coming to Jesus and saying, hey, Lord, if my brother sins against me 7 times in one day and I forgive him, I'm doing a pretty good job here, aren't I, Lord? Jesus said, no, Peter, 77 times. We're not sure because of the construction of the Greek in that passage. It was either 77 times, or it could also be translated 70 times 7. In either event, I think Jesus is speaking with a figure of speech, which basically is saying, Peter, every time it comes up, you have to extend forgiveness. There is no minimum number or maximum number. Every time it comes up, forgiveness is not a one-time event. I think in terms of myself, where I've wronged another person or been wronged, and I can remember instances, and every time that instance or that event comes back to my mind, if I feel the resentment coming up, I've got to forgive again. There was a situation where someone hurt me pretty deeply, and I had forgiven them, and I had reached a point of acceptance. And then one day I received a communication, and in receiving that communication, it was a letter, and it was from my friend, and I thought, oh my goodness, here's a letter from my friend. This is going to be great. I'm going to be able to restore relationship with this person. Well, once I opened the letter, I realized it was just another nasty letter, and it was just more of the same. And immediately I was right back to where I had been when the original betrayal had occurred. And in that moment, I had to sit down and I prayed and I asked God to help me to forgive him. See, every time it comes up, you forgive. It is not a one-time event. And when you think that forgiveness is a feeling versus a choice, or that it's a one-time event versus a continual series of events, then we limit ourselves, we prevent ourselves from walking in the freedom of forgiveness. Forgiveness is also not dismissing someone's moral responsibility. I can forgive a person who has stolen from me and completely forgive them, yet they still have a moral responsibility before the law, in some cases, for that to be made right. I can forgive a person who owes me money, but they still have a moral responsibility to make it right. And sometimes we don't forgive because we think that by forgiving we're letting them off the hook. No, you're not letting them off the hook. You're letting them off your hook. You're dismissing your right for retribution, your right to collect on that debt. But you're not dismissing their responsibility before God to make things right. So those are 3 keys. Number 1, remember, forgiveness is not a feeling, it's a choice. Number 2, it's not a one-time event. It is a series of events that you're going to have to continue to do over and over and over every time the offense comes up. And number 3, it's not dismissing someone's moral responsibility. In fact, when I mentioned letting someone off the hook, I had a specific instance where I learned that because I had a situation where someone had harmed me. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and every time I thought of them, I would sit down and I would say a prayer for them, and I'd say, Lord, I forgive them. I would speak it out loud and I'd say, Lord, I forgive them. And one day in my prayer, I saw the individual about this big, like a little G.I. Joe. And they were hanging on a hook right from their back. And they were at the mouth and shaking and twisting, and they were ranting and raving. And I saw in my mind a fingers pick them up and take them off the hook and move them over onto another hook. And in that instance, when I accepted that, I felt freedom, because I realized that what the Lord was telling me is, you let them off your hook, they're on my hook. And ultimately, isn't that where we really need to put people anyway? I don't know the total conditions of another person's heart, and I don't know the totality of their life, but I'll give it to God and I'll let Him work it out. If you will remember, forgiveness is not a choice. I mean, it is a choice. Forgiveness is not a feeling, it's a choice. It's not a one-time event, and it's not dismissing your moral responsibility. It will help you to discipline yourself to forgive.
Some days I forget that I'm free, and sometimes my feet don't wanna carry me.